What if I told you that long before Dracula whispered through Transylvanian legends, before the howls of werewolves echoed over haunted moors, there was a secret, forgotten cult? A cult so obsessed with conquering death, they forged monsters that stalked the nightmares of every civilization that followed. Tonight, we're diving into the real heart of darkness, a tale of blood, terror, and forbidden power. Welcome to Tales Mythology, where the boundaries between legend and reality disappear. If you love myths, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to join us in discovering more scary legends. Why do stories about vampires and werewolves still haunt us after centuries? Maybe it's because these creatures symbolize our deepest fears, the craving for immortality, the price of power, and the darkness lurking in every human soul. But what if these legends have a common origin, a single, horrific cult lost to history, deep in the forgotten corners of Eastern Europe, before the borders of nations and the rise of Christianity? A shadowy order gathered, led by a woman known only as the Matron. They weren't just seeking a cure for a wasting illness, they wanted to break the cycle of life and death itself. Imagine the desperation of a dying leader, promising eternal life to anyone willing to pay the ultimate price. The cult's methods were as extreme as their ambition: ritual sacrifice, alchemical experiments, and an obsession with the black earth beneath ancient burial mounds. Real cults in history, whether the blood rites of the Aztecs or secret societies like the Thule Society, have always pushed the limits of belief and morality. But this cult took things even further, delving into forbidden sciences and the occult, creating a ritual that would rewrite the rules of existence. Tonight, I watched the matron drink the dark elixir, her hands trembling, eyes wild. She claims the agony is proof of rebirth, that the parasite she carries will grant us all a future beyond the grave. The matron's quest led to the discovery of a parasite, some say a demon, others a twisted life form buried with the oldest dead. By infecting herself, she invited agony and transformation. Her followers believed the suffering meant success, but immortality came with a terrible cost: endless hunger, animal senses, a gradual loss of humanity. Personal analysis. Throughout history, people have used leeches, drank strange tonics, and even tried blood transfusions to ward off death. The cult's actions monstrous, as they see mirror humanity's real, reckless pursuit of eternal life. Story example. In medieval Europe, the legend of blood Countess Elizabeth Bathory Ho supposedly bathed in the blood of Verginsicos, the matron's obsession. But this cult went further, infecting others to create night-bound predators, sometimes losing control and birthing grotesque, half-beast monsters. In their quest for perfection, the cult mixed parasites and werewolf blood. Most subjects died, but those who survived became Vârcolac, living weapons with monstrous strength, bestial instincts, and a hunger that could not be satisfied. Why do so many myths feature hybrid skimmer, sphinxes, or, in this case, a fusion of vampire and werewolf? Maybe it's because we fear losing ourselves to the animal inside, or because we know that unchecked ambition always births unintended consequences. We rose as one, we hunted as one, but what we Bakami do not have the words. I watched as the first Vârcolac shattered stone with its jaws and tore through both friend and foe. There was no loyalty, only hunger. The cult's dream of power spiraled out of control. The very monsters they created, Vârcolac, hybrids of vampire and werewolf, soon turned on their makers. Temples that had once echoed with chants now trembled with howls and screams. Imagine standing at the center of your greatest achievement, only to watch it rip itself apart. This is a pattern as old as ambition itself. We see it in myth, history, and even modern science. Prometheus brought fire to mankind and was eternally punished. Dr. Frankenstein created life, only to be destroyed by it. Nuclear power promised a new age, but left shadows burned into stone, Hiroshima and Chernobyl. In this story, the Vârcolac became a punishment for arrogance. They didn't distinguish between cultist and intruder. Their hunger was universal. Cultists, desperate to regain control, abandon their sacred temples, retreating deeper into labyrinthine tunnels, where the sun never reached and hope flickered dim. Picture a modern underground facility scientist racing to contain a genetic experiment gone wrong. In 2014, a viral outbreak at the CDC in Atlanta led to accidental exposure of workers to deadly anthrax. The official reports were subdued, but the fear was real. What happens when control slips away? I saw brothers, sisters, people I'd called kin for decades devoured as the creatures we created tore through the stone. Their screams followed us into the darkness. In those tunnels, every shadow was a predator, every sound a threat. The parasite didn't die with the cult's collapse. It seeped out, unseen, into the forests and rivers, infecting animals and humans alike. What began as a story of monsters became a plague. Real-world parallels are chilling. The Black Death swept through Europe, not as a mythical punishment, but as a microscopic invader. Rumors and terror emptied cities, just as stories of blood-drinking beasts emptied villages near the cult's mountain sanctuaries. In the centuries after the cult fell, villagers whispered about cursed land, rivers tasted of iron, livestock vanished, and anyone brave enough to hunt for them often disappeared too. The few survivors spoke of eyes like molten iron watching from the woods. Invented real-life story example. In the early 20th century, American towns near Typhoid Mary Mallon emptied as panic spread about a single contagious cook. The pattern repeats there itself, is as contagious as any disease. It's better to lose a neighbor than open the gate, one trembling elder warned, refusing to search for missing cattle. Sometimes, caution is wisdom unknown in the forest, is often more dangerous than what we imagine. As time passed, the legend of the Vârcolac faded into folklore until curiosity, greed, and the thirst for knowledge drew a new generation back to the mountains. In many cultures, ancient tombs and crypts are believed to house both danger and treasure. The myth of the Forbidden Tomb is a warning about hubris. In this tale, a young scholar named Kalim finds fragments of the cult's writings. Driven by obsession, he leads mercenaries into the ruins. The discovery of a chained sarcophagus marked with warnings and the erased face of a crowned figure reaches the real-world opening of King Tutankhamun's tomb. Wonder followed by disaster. Against Kalim's pleas, the mercenaries break the seals. The air turns foul. One by one, torches flicker out and something ancient awakens. The village nearby finds only scattered weapons, claw marks, and massive footprints leading back into the wilderness. Invented story example. This is not unlike tales from the Siberian permafrost, where scientists uncover frozen viruses tens of thousands of years old sometimes at the risk of releasing new plagues. Our fascination with the past and our disregard for warnings is as old as humanity. We unleashed it and it wears her voice. The awakened sovereign Vârcolac, now with the matron's voice and will, becomes more than a beast. It commands packs of mutated wolves and reshapes the land into its own dominion. Rivers blacken, crops wither, and a once thriving civilization collapses into chaos. Soldiers and hunters sent to destroy it are instead consumed, transformed, or driven mad. This is an echo of our worst nightmares, losing control not just over our creations, but over the world itself. Stories of these times would inspire later legends, cursed forests, blood-hungry beasts, and the idea that evil, once awakened, can never truly be destroyed and endured. Personal reflection. Why do we keep telling stories like this? Because, at heart, they remind us of our limits, that ambition unchecked, knowledge untempered by humility, and curiosity without caution are more dangerous than any monster. Human kingdoms, in a final act of defiance, gather armies and devise a desperate plan to starve and trap the sovereign Vârcolac. Thousands die in the effort, and the valley burns 4 days. Yet, as the smoke clears, hope vanishes. The beast has escaped. Cities crumble, infected spies spread the curse, and society falls apart from within. Even as chroniclers abandon their pens, a few warnings survive. We are the final breath, and the night has claimed it. Real-life parallel. This is reminiscent of pandemics and disasters where containment fails and society's last hope becomes simply to endure. Think of the collapse of the Roman Empire, or the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, when fear of the unknown brought the world to a standstill. The true fate of the sovereign Vârcolac remains a mystery. Some say it became a spirit woven into the earth, feeding eternally. Others whisper that its bloodline lies dormant, waiting to be awakened by those foolish or desperate enough to try. But one warning endures, carved in stone and whispered in dreams. The night remembers, the night waits, and when it rises again, the world will bow. So what is the lesson of the Vârcolac cult? The real monsters are not always fangs and claws. They are our own ambitions, unchecked and unrepentant. Every age has its forbidden knowledge, its lines that should not be crossed. The difference between progress and disaster is sometimes only a question of humility. What do you think? Would you have opened the tomb, chased immortality, or heeded the warnings? Let us know in the comments. And remember, sometimes legends endure because the dangers they warn against are still with us. Imagine a land where memory itself has become haunted. After the fall of the cult, the mountains and forests stood silent, not out of peace, but because the echoes of horror kept even the wind away. The infection did not vanish with its creators. Like a curse cast upon the earth, it seeped into the roots of trees, trickled through hidden rivers, and passed invisibly through the veins of animals and wanderers alike. Over the years, the story of the Vârcolac became more than legend. It was woven into the folklore of every village skirting the old mountain range. Why do some stories survive while others fade? Anthropologists will tell you, legends that persist are those that offer guidance, warnings, or explanations for the inexplicable. In rural Romania, travelers might still find elders who close their doors tightly at dusk, not for wolves, but for the nameless things they believe still prowl the forest after dark. In this way, the parasite and its monstrous offspring lived on, not only in flesh, but in fear. Some say the Vârcolac became the root for every werewolf, vampire, and shapeshifter myth to spread through Eastern Europe and beyond. In time, the meaning of Vârcolac itself shifted. Where once it described a singular horror, it became a catch-all for every unexplained disappearance, every mutilated animal, every howl at the edge of town. This is a pattern repeated across cultures. The vampire, the werewolf, even the boogeyman tales our ancestors used to explain just natural dangers, but also the darkness inside human nature. They were cautionary tales. Don't go out at night. Don't trust strangers. Respect the land, or else. But the Vârcolac was something different, born only from fear, but from human ambition run wild. It was, in many ways, the first modern monster, a hybrid, a product of forbidden knowledge and a warning about crossing lines nature meant to keep closed. Scholars debate whether such a creature ever truly existed, but even skeptics admit that the old records are strange blood rituals, sudden disappearances, entire communities wiped out with no explanation. The more rational the world became, the more urgently people clung to old stories, because, deep down, we know every era produces its own monsters. Some are flesh and blood, some are born of our dreams or our nightmares. What makes the Vârcolac myth unique is how deeply it echoes real, historical fear, especially of disease and transformation. Parasites and blood-borne illnesses were once mysterious, invisible agents of horror, turning the healthy into the dying, the familiar into the monstrous. Even today, viruses mutate, spread, and leap between species in ways that feel almost supernatural. The cult's parasite, described as alive and hungry, prefigures our modern anxieties about pandemics, genetic editing, and bioweapons. The line between science and superstition blurs at the edges. The ancient cult's efforts to improve their bodies and conquer death led to disaster, just as unchecked scientific ambitions sometimes does today. Is this just a story about monsters, or a warning about hubris? Perhaps both. Myths endure when they teach us something important, and the lesson of the Vârcolac is that every attempt to conquer the natural order comes with a price. For every legend, there are personal tragedies. A mother waiting for her son who never returns from the woods. A priest who writes, "They glow like molten iron, and when they find you, you do not die quickly." One lost hunter leaves behind a final note. The forest moves. Its breath is warm, and it watches. These stories, fictionalized but grounded in the reality of fear, make the myth real. For the people living in the shadow of the mountains, the Vârcolac was not just a story. It was a presence, a possibility, a reason to pray for dawn. Even today, some families in remote Carpathian villages refuse to bury their dead at night, believing it attracts the attention of old, hungry things. The past may be gone, but its shadows linger. In our time, the monsters of the past have changed shape. Urban legends replace forest demons, but the warnings remain. Every era invents its own Vârcolac, whether it's a virus, a rogue AI, or a faceless conspiracy. Why do we keep telling these stories? Because they force us to ask uncomfortable questions. Where does evil come from? Are we truly in control of what we create? Can we escape the consequences of our own ambitions? The tale of the Vârcolac is ultimately a mirror. It asks us, what are we willing to risk for power, knowledge, or immortality? And what will we do when the darkness we unleash refuses to obey? The night remembers, will we? So what can we learn from the myth of the Vârcolac cult? First, that our pursuit of power and immortality with a noble or desperate fin leads us into darkness. Second, that every generation must confront the consequences of those who came before and decide whether to repeat their mistakes or heed their warnings. The monsters in our stories reflect the monsters within ourselves: pride, fear, ambition, and the refusal to accept our own limits. If you were in Callan's place, standing before the sealed sarcophagus, would you open it? Would you chase the promise of eternal life, even if it meant unleashing something the world isn't ready for? I want to hear your thoughts. Comment below. What's your favorite origin myth? Do you think we create monsters, or do they create us?